Hi, I'm the Tabletop teacher, and in this video we'll take a closer look at one of the basic gameplay elements of Heroclix, the line of fire. I'll cover the basics for new players, and then I'll address some of the subtleties of elevated terrain. When you want one of your characters to hit an opposing character with a ranged combat attack, you will need to be able to draw a line of fire between both characters, as well as be within range. You sometimes need a line of fire for actions that are not attacks, and the line of fire principles are the same. A line of fire is an imaginary line you can draw between two characters on the map, from the center of one square to the center of the other. If there's nothing but squares of clear or water terrain of the same level in between the attacker and the target, you have what's called a clear line of fire. Like what we see here. Two-Face can reach Harvey Bullock with a ranged combat attack. He has a clear line of fire, and he has enough range to do so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Though Harvey Bullock has a clear line of fire to Two-Face, he doesn't have enough range. 1, 2, 3, 4. He's one square shy of being able to make that attack. If there are one or several squares of hindering terrain between the attacker and the target, or if the target is occupying hindering terrain, there's still a line of fire, but it's considered hindered. The target character then gets a +1 bonus to its defense value for that attack. Mind you, the attacker could very well be occupying hindering terrain, and that wouldn't change a thing, which is logical. Imagine the attacker hiding behind a rock, aiming for an opponent smack in the middle of clear terrain. No problem there, right? Now, have the target hide behind a car door, and this would indeed improve its defense. It's the line of fire to the target that determines whether or not the line of fire is hindered. As soon as a line of fire crosses even a small part of a square of hindering terrain, or goes through an intersection point of two squares of hindering terrain, the line of fire is considered hindered, and the target gets a +1 bonus to its defense. If the line of fire passes through a square of blocking terrain or a wall, even just a small part of that square, it is then blocked, and the attack cannot be made. Remember, the line of fire is straight. Very often, you won't count the squares for range in a straight line, and that's fine, but you must still be able to draw a straight line of fire to your target. If the line of fire passes through a square occupied by another character of the same size or greater, friendly or not, it is blocked, and the attack cannot be made. Smaller characters do not block your line of fire. If the line of fire passes through the intersection point of two squares of blocking terrain, it is blocked. You have to imagine that the barrier is straight across those two squares. Same thing goes for a line of fire that would pass right in between two adjacent characters. This blocks the line of fire, unless one of the characters is of a smaller size. If the line of fire passes through a square of elevated terrain, it is also blocked, unless we're talking about characters on the rim. In this case, the line of fire doesn't actually pass through the square because that square is the target. Now, when considering lines of fire that cross elevated terrain, you have to imagine a third dimension, which is of course absent from a 2D map. There's a line of fire chart at the back of the rulebook with all the different scenarios to consider. But here are a few key points that help me get a better sense of the whole thing. Let's start with Two-Face on the rim of elevated terrain. He has a clear line of fire to Commissioner Gordon on the lower level because his line of fire crosses nothing but clear terrain. Two-Face would actually have a line of fire to anyone in this area. Now, if he were positioned just one square away from the rim, his line of fire would be blocked. Why? Well, here's a rule of thumb. The rim is a good vantage point, but as soon as a line of fire crosses just a part of a single square of elevated terrain, it's blocked. You can't shoot through the floor. And this goes both ways. Gordon has a line of fire to Two-Face here, but wouldn't in this situation. Interesting fact about the rim, characters on either side of the rim can't make close combat attacks, but can make ranged combat attacks to one another, because they're technically not adjacent. When targeting from an elevated position, hindering terrain and standard-sized characters on the lower level don't matter, unless the target is hiding in hindering terrain. Makes sense. The line of fire goes over them. Blocking terrain and larger characters still block line of fire in that situation though. The same logic applies to a giant or colossal character targeting a standard character on the same level. Here's the logic. If you imagine a giant to be 2 stories tall, that character's line of fire starts at what would be elevated terrain for any standard-sized character. This is also why characters of a smaller size don't block line of fire. Keep in mind, all of this goes both ways. If an attacker sees a target, the target can see the attacker. Some characters have improved targeting that can really take your opponents by surprise. For instance, characters that have the sharpshooter symbol instead of the usual fist attack symbol ignore characters for targeting purposes. Some characters like Manhunter ignore hindering terrain for targeting purposes, which is especially useful against characters that have stealth. And some rare characters can ignore elevated terrain when targeting, and fewer still can draw lines of fire through blocking terrain. Add some of these characters to your force and your opponents will have trouble hiding from your attacks. It would take forever to cover every possible line of fire scenario, and it wouldn't be that useful. It's unlikely anyone could take everything in and remember it all. It's better to refer to the line of fire chart as different situations arise. But in my opinion, there is one line of that chart that's really worth a lot of your attention. If you understand this one, pretty much everything else falls into place. And you're in luck. This is what I explained in detail just a moment ago. I hope you enjoyed this overview of lines of fire for new Heroclix players. I might eventually make a video that addresses some more line of fire questions, so make sure to leave your questions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Tabletop Teacher, and as always, thanks for playing with me.